In the sleepy streets of Silver Oak Springs, an unthinkable act of cruelty is about to shatter the town's peaceful facade. When a feared biker gang known as the Dark Phantoms vandalizes a little girl's lemonade stand, they think they're making just another power move. They couldn't be more mistaken. This isn't just any child, and that battered lemonade stand belongs to a Navy SEAL's daughter. James J.J. Walker, a veteran of the most covert special operations missions, has never turned his back on a fight, especially when his own family is targeted. What unfolds next is a relentless showdown between hardened criminals who rule by fear and a father whose unbreakable resolve was forged on battlefields most people never even knew existed. This is more than a vigilante tale. It's the story of how one man's elite training and unwavering love will turn a small town into a battleground and remind everyone that some warriors never lose their edge. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. Silver Oak Springs was best described as an unassuming little town with a single main street, 2 traffic lights, and a close-knit community. The air held the scent of pine and fresh dew, carrying with it the sound of rustling leaves and occasional bursts of chatter from neighbors catching up on front porches. On most days, the biggest local news would be about a new family moving in or a local cat stuck in a tree. Yet beneath the peaceful veneer, many whispered about a darker presence lurking on the outskirts of town. The Dark Phantoms motorcycle gang had set up a makeshift compound at an abandoned mill just south of the city line. They were the shadow over Silver Oak Springs' tranquility, rumored to run extortion, vandalism, and a list of violent crimes that grew longer every time the local paper dared to mention them. They seemed untouchable, prowling the highways on their roaring bikes, leaving fear in their wake. The police had tried to contain them, but a series of threats, bribes, and intimidation tactics kept the gang one step ahead of serious legal repercussions. On a bright summer morning, however, none of that was on 8-year-old Lily Walker's mind. She had her own important business to tend to. Lily loved the feeling of independence and purpose she got every time she set up her lemonade stand in the front yard. The stand itself was a rickety wooden table decorated with hand-drawn signs. She used permanent markers to brighten each letter, reminding passers-by that all proceeds went to the local children's hospital. She had started doing this project months ago, after visiting a friend who was ill. Ever since, Lily made it a point to pour her heart into helping other kids in need. Next to her jar for donations was a small, worn-out photograph. It showed a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp Navy SEAL uniform, standing next to a smiling 4-year-old Lily. The man in the photograph was her father, James J.J. Walker, who spent much of his time away on missions or training exercises. He was a beacon of safety in Lily's life, a promise that no matter what, if things ever got bad, Daddy would come home and make everything right. That morning, Lily's mother, Sarah, came out to check on her daughter. Sarah was a petite woman with light brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She had gentle eyes but a determined spirit, the type of mother who would do anything to protect her child. Balancing a mug of coffee in one hand, she wiped a smudge of lemonade powder off Lily's cheek with the other. "All set, sweetie?" Sarah asked. Lily beamed at her. "Yup. I used extra lemons today, and I hung a new sign." She pointed proudly to a piece of cardboard cut into a heart shape, reading, "Help Kids, Buy Lemonade," colored in bright red crayon. Sarah's heart swelled with pride. She'd been worried about Lily's inclination to give away so much of her own money, but she couldn't help admire the generosity that bloomed in her daughter. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, planting a gentle kiss on Lily's forehead. A couple of neighbors strolled by, offering Lily a thumbs up and a few coins in exchange for plastic cups of lemonade. Sarah observed from a short distance, sipping her coffee. Life felt serene. They weren't wealthy by any means. Sarah worked part-time at a local florist to make ends meet while James was away. But their home was filled with love, which often felt like treasure enough. Behind the scenes, however, tension lay coiled around the town. The Dark Phantoms were rumored to be embroiled in a new turf war with smaller gangs in neighboring counties. In a place like Silver Oak Springs, that spelled trouble. The highways leading in and out served as prime smuggling routes for illegal substances, not to mention a pipeline to expand their extortion operations. The local sheriff's department's budget was meager, and a few officers were said to be on the gang's payroll, whether through fear or greed. No one, least of all Lily, would have imagined that this menacing group of bikers would take any interest in a simple lemonade stand on a Saturday morning. But fate has a way of entangling innocence with malice when the lines of territory and pride are crossed. The girl in pigtails hustled to refill her lemonade pitcher as the day warmed up, humming an off-key rendition of a pop tune she heard on the radio. She glanced at the photograph of her father. It was a tradition she had started a year ago, to greet his picture every morning with a small salute, just like he had taught her. Sarah went inside to grab something from the kitchen, leaving Lily to attend the stand alone. That was when the rumble of motorbikes approached from the direction of the old mill. For riders, clad in black leather jackets embroidered with a sinister phantom skull, slowed as they passed the walkers' front yard. Their engines rumbled like thunder in the otherwise quiet street. At first, Lily looked up, wide-eyed with curiosity. She had seen motorcyclists before, but never this close, and never so many at once. Her naive smile wavered when she noticed the menacing skull insignias. Something about their presence triggered an instinct to be wary. One of the men locked eyes with her, and she sensed a chill. The lead biker wore mirrored sunglasses, obscuring his eyes, but his posture and grin radiated danger. He called out, "What have we got here?" "A little lemonade stand." Lily nodded, mustering her best attempt at a polite greeting. "Yes, sir." "Lemonade is 50 cents a cup, or more if you want to donate to sick kids." The corners of the man's mouth twitched as if he found the statement either amusing or pathetic. There was a brief pause, and then he laughed, low and cruel. "Sick kids, huh? That's adorable," he said in a mocking tone. Something in the air told Lily this conversation wasn't going to end with a friendly donation. She felt an uncomfortable tightness in her chest. She looked over her shoulder, hoping to see her mom stepping back outside or a friendly neighbor within shouting distance. But the front yard was momentarily empty, except for the gang of strangers. The second biker revved his engine, causing Lily to jump at the abrupt roar. "You might want to take that sign down, kid," he sneered. "We charge people who want to run a business here. It's called a protection fee." Lily blinked, not entirely understanding what they meant. "But this is my yard," she managed to say, voice trembling. "I'm just selling lemonade." The lead biker snorted, took a moment to look around, and then swung his leg off his Harley. He stood over Lily's stand, overshadowing her. She noticed the tattoos covering his arms, skulls, knives, and cryptic symbols. His presence felt like poison in the bright summer sun. "Is that so?" he asked, lightly drumming his leather-gloved fingers on the flimsy wooden top of a lemonade table. "Well, you see, we run these streets. That includes whatever puny little enterprise you've got going on. Didn't your mom teach you gotta pay a fee to do business around here?" Lily didn't move. She couldn't move. Confusion locked up her limbs. She was only 8 years old. The concept of a protection fee and territory wars meant nothing to her except a profound sense of fear. Slowly, the man reached across the table, ignoring the plastic cups, ignoring the half-full pitcher, and picked up the photograph. Lily's eyes went wide. Her father's picture was something she cherished deeply, her symbol of hope. Immediately, she let out a small yelp. "Stop. That's my dad's photo." At her protest, the man held it up to his face, tilting his head in fake curiosity. "A Navy SEAL, huh? He's not around now, is he?" Lily's heart pounded. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to tell them that her father was away, possibly on deployment. She swallowed, gathering a strand of courage. "Please, leave that alone." He gave her a cruel grin. "You know what, princess, I got a better idea. Why don't you tell your folks the Dark Phantoms say hello? And next time you set up this stand, you better have our cut." He dropped the photograph onto the dusty ground, stepping back with a sneer. Lily gasped as the edges of the photo crumpled and smeared against the dirt. She felt a sting in her eyes, tears threatening to spill. Suddenly, another biker flicked a lit cigarette toward the cardboard sign reading, "Help Kids," by Lemonade. The tip sizzled against the marker ink, leaving a small, black singe. Lily cried out, scrambling to pat out the embers. The men laughed and revved their engines in unison. "Why don't we give the kid a taste of what happens when people don't respect the phantoms?" one biker suggested, reaching for the stand. Lily screamed as she watched him knock over the pitcher, spilling sticky lemonade everywhere. The table wobbled, and with a swift kick from the lead biker, the entire stand collapsed in a splintered heap. Cups scattered across the lawn. They turned back to their motorcycles, leaving Lily in shock. But the lead biker wasn't done. He turned one last time, pointing at her. "Next time, have our money ready." With that final threat, they roared down the street, their laughter lingering ominously in the muggy morning air. Lily stood frozen, hands trembling as she knelt to pick up her father's photograph from the dirt. The top corner was bent, and dust covered his proud, uniformed face. Her mother burst out the front door, coffee mug forgotten on the counter. Sarah's breath caught in her throat when she saw the ruin, the broken wood, and her daughter hunched over, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What happened?" Sarah cried out, grabbing Lily's shoulders gently. Lily sobbed into her mother's arms, holding up the creased photograph. They ruined everything. They said next time I have to pay them." Sarah's heart hammered. She glanced at the road, but the bikers were already gone. Fury and terror warred within her. She cupped her daughter's face, her voice breaking. "My baby, I'm so sorry. It's going to be okay." Yet even as she comforted Lily, Sarah knew that a line had been crossed. The dark phantoms had never outright harmed them before, but now they had violated their home turf and threatened her child. She would have to make a phone call she'd been dreading, the one to James, Lily's father. He had planned to come home soon, but if the dark phantoms thought they could bully an innocent little girl, she knew her husband would turn the quiet of Silver Oak Springs into a battlefield if necessary. Her voice shook as she whispered to Lily, "Let's go inside. We'll call Daddy." The rest of that Saturday was a blur of tears and frantic phone calls. Sarah tucked Lily into the sofa with her favorite blanket and a cartoon playing on low volume, trying to soothe her bruised heart. The shock had worn off, replaced by a trembling sense of injustice. Lily clutched her father's photograph tightly, as though letting it go might allow the bikers to take even that from her. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed James's temporary contact number. His assignments often kept him off the grid, but she had a code she could use if it was an emergency. She typed the passcode with sweaty fingers. 3 rings later, the call was answered by James's commanding officer, who promised to relay the message as soon as James was in a safe zone. The weight of the situation settled over Sarah like a suffocating blanket. She knew her husband better than anyone. Once he heard what happened, he would move heaven and earth to protect his family. But Navy SEAL missions had their schedules and protocols. It could be a day, a week, maybe longer before he could return. She prayed it wouldn't be too late. Outside, neighbors gathered in hushed circles, the remnants of Lily's lemonade stand in sight. Some had witnessed the aftermath, had seen the bikers riding off, and were too fearful to interfere. Some tried to console Sarah, offering to help rebuild the stand or chip in for new supplies, but Sarah's polite nods were overshadowed by the roiling anxiety in her gut. The question that kept gnawing at her was, what's next? By late afternoon, a knock at the door pulled Sarah from the swirling chaos of her thoughts. She took a steadying breath and opened it to reveal Deputy Charles Reeves, a tall, lean officer with a weathered face and kind eyes. He was accompanied by Deputy Marnie Ortega, a newcomer to the department who had a reputation for thoroughness. They offered solemn expressions of concern. "Mrs. Walker," Reeves said, tipping his hat. "Heard there was some trouble this morning." Sarah nodded, stepping aside to let them in. Lily was still curled up on the sofa. The television played a cheerful cartoon that felt painfully out of place. "Trouble is an understatement," Sarah replied, crossing her arms to stop them from trembling. "They threatened my daughter and destroyed her lemonade stand. I want to file a report." Immediately, Deputy Ortega moved to kneel near Lily, speaking softly. "Hi there, sweetie. I'm Arnie. I'm really sorry about what happened. Are you okay?" Lily nodded hesitantly, but Sarah knew her daughter was far from okay. Ortega's gentle tone helped put Lily at ease enough to say, "They told me to pay them a fee for selling lemonade." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "A fee? Unbelievable. My daughter is 8. She's raising money for sick kids, for heaven's sake." Reeves took out a small notepad. "I want to jot down some details. Anything you can remember about the men, their patches, or maybe how many there were." Sarah responded quickly, describing the Dark Phantom's emblem, a black phantom skull, and how there were 4 bikers, all in black leather. One of them had a shaved head, another had a long ponytail. The one who did most of the talking wore these mirrored sunglasses. They threatened her, said next time she needed to have their cut ready. Reeves sighed, exchanging glances with Ortega. "We know who they are. Or we have our suspicions. But we don't have much evidence to press charges that'll stick." "They've been careful." Sarah felt her frustration spike. "Are you saying there's nothing you can do?" Deputy Ortega shook her head. "We'll do what we can, ma'am. But these guys, they've been eluding us for months. We've tried to get warrants. They have a team of lawyers and intimidation tactics. It's complicated." Sarah clenched her jaw, a spike of protective rage flaring in her chest. "And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Just wait for them to come back and hurt my daughter again?" Reeves softened his tone, trying to be reassuring. "We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood, make our presence more visible. If you see or hear anything suspicious, call us right away." His words rang hollow, and everyone in the room knew it. The Dark Phantoms had grown emboldened over the years, pushing the boundaries of the law. The local sheriff's department was outgunned, both literally and politically. Still, Sarah forced a small nod. "Fine," she muttered. "But I'm warning you, my husband is a Navy SEAL. When he comes home," Reeves cleared his throat, trying to maintain professional composure. "Right? We know about your husband's service. Just please encourage him to follow the law and whatever happens next. We don't want vigilante justice on top of an already tense situation." After the officers left, Sarah locked the door, every muscle in her body taut. She turned off the TV, knelt beside her daughter, and gently brushed the hair from Lily's tear-streaked face. "Mommy," Lily said in a trembling voice, "when is Daddy coming home?" Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. "I don't know yet, sweetie. But soon. Very soon." In the next few hours, the evening sun cast long shadows across the living room floor. Every noise, every motorcycle engine revving in the distance, made Sarah's heart jump. She had to be strong. For Lily. For James. As the day darkened into night, she methodically checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. She caught her reflection in the window and saw a woman she barely recognized. Eyes red from crying, her expression hardened with protective fury. Upstairs, Sarah found a small security safe in their bedroom closet. Inside were a few important documents, an old revolver that had belonged to her father, and a single box of ammunition. James had shown her how to use it for emergencies. She had never envisioned a scenario where she'd have to defend their home against a biker gang, but the reality was setting in. She took out the revolver, loaded it with trembling hands, and tested the safety. Even the cold weight of the weapon did little to assuage the dread. Still, there was a subtle comfort in knowing she wasn't completely defenseless. Downstairs, Lily stirred on the couch, calling out, "Mom." Sarah hurried back, placing the gun in a secure but accessible spot. She found Lily rubbing her eyes, a mixture of fear and confusion swirling in her gaze. "I heard a noise," Lily murmured, hugging her knees. Sarah wrapped her in a tight embrace. "It's okay. I'm here. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." They lay awake together in the living room, the only light coming from a small lamp by the sofa. Images of that morning played on a loop in Sarah's mind. Lily's stricken face, the biker's mocking laughter, the shattered lemonade stand. When Lily finally dozed off, exhaustion etched on her small features, Sarah gently pulled a blanket over her and resisted the urge to stand watch at the window all night. Midnight. A car's headlights swept across the living room wall, startling Sarah. She froze, listening. It passed, continuing down the street. Her heart hammered, adrenaline spiking. She realized she was holding her breath. Slowly, she exhaled, but the feeling of unease didn't subside. She glanced at her phone, hoping for any sign from James. The last update she had was that he'd received the message. That could mean anything. He might be on a plane, or a ship, or somewhere training. She had no choice but to wait. A new day would come, and with it, a horrifying uncertainty. Silver Oak Springs had never felt so dark. Yet Sarah held on to one unshakable truth. Her husband was a force of nature. He had survived harrowing missions half the world away. She knew the fury in his heart would be unstoppable when he found out that someone had hurt his little girl. Sleep came in fitful spurts for Sarah that night, but she welcomed even that fractured rest. Deep in her dreams, she imagined the roar of a helicopter, boots hitting the ground. She saw James stepping out in full gear, scanning the area for threats. A wave of relief washed over her dream self. Reality would not be so simple, she knew, but the mental image gave her strength. For now, the only thing they could do was endure. 3 days later, in the gray light of dawn, James J.J. Walker stepped off a transport plane at a small military airstrip 2 hours from Silver Oak Springs. Dust swirled around his boots as he slung a duffel bag over his shoulder. Lines of fatigue crossed his face, but his eyes burned with purpose. Even among other servicemen, James was imposing, nearly 6'3", corded muscles refined by countless hours of SEAL training, and a gaze that could unsettle the most hardened opponents. He'd been in the middle of a training rotation when the emergency message reached him. His commanding officer had cleared him to return stateside with a warning. Keep it legal, Walker. Handle your business, but don't drag the Navy into it. As soon as James had set foot on solid ground, he'd commandeered a phone, calling Sarah. Her voice was shaky, but the moment she heard his deep baritone, she let out a relieved sob. She quickly filled him in on the attack on Lily's lemonade stand, the intimidation, the local police's lack of substantial action. Every word sharpened James's anger. Though he kept his composure, inside he was a storm. He ended the call with a simple statement. I'm on my way. Don't worry. I've got this. Now, as he headed to a nondescript rental sedan, his thoughts churned. He recalled Lily's bright eyes when he last saw her, how she'd proudly shown him her plan to raise money for sick children. The memory of her heartbreak and the smears of dust on his photo pounded in his mind. For an enemy abroad, he had protocols. For bullies that threatened his family, the rules changed. The drive to Silver Oak Springs was quiet and tense. James kept the radio off, focusing on the road and imagining scenarios. He knew the dark phantoms by reputation. They were not simple petty criminals. They'd garnered enough influence to scare entire towns into submission. But they'd never encountered James Walker. By mid-morning, he pulled into the driveway of his home, shutting off the engine. At once, the door flung open, and Lily rushed out, tears shining in her eyes. "Daddy," she cried, bounding down the porch steps. He caught her in a powerful hug, lifting her off the ground. The moment was sweet yet undercut by the knowledge of why he was here. He set Lily down gently and looked at her face, noticing how she bit her lip to keep from crying. "Look at me, baby girl," he said softly. "Nobody hurts my family. You understand." Lily nodded, eyes wide with trust. She extended a trembling hand to show him the creased photograph. They threw it on the ground. "I'm sorry it got dirty." James took the photo, smoothing out the wrinkles carefully as though it were a precious artifact. Anger flared in his chest. "Nothing to be sorry about," he whispered, bending down to plant a gentle kiss on Lily's forehead. Sarah approached them, tearful but relieved. James wrapped one arm around his wife's waist and pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "Thank you for staying strong," he murmured. "I'll take it from here." Sarah's eyes flickered with worry. She was deeply relieved to see him, but afraid of what he might do next. "James," she said softly, "the police are watching them, but it's not enough. They gave me the whole line about waiting for more evidence." He nodded. "I'm not going to sit around and wait. We'll do this smart, but we'll do it." They went inside. The living room was tidied up, but James noticed new locks on the windows and fresh scuffs on the door frames. Sarah's attempts to fortify the house. A wave of gratitude and regret washed over him. He hated that they'd had to live in fear. Once Lily scampered upstairs to play quietly in her room, James sat down with Sarah on the couch, taking her hands in his. "Tell me every detail." Everything they said, how many there were, how they acted. Sarah relayed the entire story in measured tones, though her voice trembled at points. James listened intently, mentally cataloging every piece of information. After she finished, he took a deep breath. "I'm going to pay a visit to the sheriff," he said. "Then I might go have a look at that old mill where the phantoms hang out." Alarm flickered in Sarah's eyes. "You can't just walk into their den. That's suicide." A grim smile tugged at James's lips. "They don't know me. And I haven't told them yet what happens when you mess with my family." Sarah squeezed his hand tighter. "Just be careful. We already have one reason to go to the hospital. We don't need another." James leaned forward, pressing a reassuring kiss to her forehead. "I'm not looking for a fight. But if it comes looking for me, let's just say I've been prepared my whole life." The light in Sarah's eyes showed she believed in him, but fear still lingered. "Okay," she relented, "but I want to know where you are at all times. If anything happens, you call me." He nodded solemnly, rising from the couch. The tension coursing through him felt like a live wire. He was a father, a husband, but also a highly trained soldier. The difference between them and him was discipline and an unbreakable reason to fight. Before leaving, he went upstairs to tuck Lily in for an early nap, or at least some quiet time. He found her in her room, hugging a stuffed dolphin he'd brought her from San Diego. She looked up, her eyes brimming with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Daddy, are you going to make them stop hurting people?" she asked, her voice small. James crouched beside the bed, stroking her hair. "Yes, sweetheart. But I need you to be brave for me, okay?" Lily nodded, lips quivering. "Yes, Daddy, I will." With that simple promise, James left home, determination etched into every line of his posture. The bright daylight outside offered a stark contrast to the dark intent fueling him. He climbed into his sedan and headed toward the small, nondescript building that served as Silver Oak Springs Sheriff's Department. The station was manned by a single clerk, a young woman who eyed James with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Can I help you?" she asked. James introduced himself succinctly, retired from active missions but still officially Navy. He asked to speak to whoever was in charge about the dark phantoms. The clerk paged the sheriff, who was out on a call, so Deputy Reeves stepped out of a back office with a polite nod. "Mr. Walker," Reeves greeted. "I was expecting you. I'm sorry about what happened to your daughter." James gave a curt nod. He wasted no time on small talk. "I want to know what's being done, because the next time they threaten my family, it won't end well for them." Reeves sighed, gesturing for James to follow him into a small interview room. Closing the door, he offered James a seat, but the seal remained standing, arms folded. "We're well aware of the threat these guys pose," Reeves began. "We've tried to pin them on numerous charges, but they have good lawyers, and half the community's scared to testify. The intimidation runs deep." James's stare was unwavering. "And what are you doing about it now?" Reeves rubbed his brow. "We have a small force here. We can't confront them head-on without backup, and the state police are stretched thin with other issues. We're building a RICO case, but it takes time and cooperation from witnesses. Right now, I don't have enough to arrest them for wrecking a lemonade stand. Vandalism, sure, but we need them in the act or someone to identify them beyond a reasonable doubt. A wave of anger surged within James. So that's it. We wait for them to do something worse. Reeves leaned forward. I understand your frustration, Mr. Walker, but the law is the law. There's a line we can't cross. I have to ask, please don't go looking for revenge. We can't have vigilantes. It'll just start a war. James exhaled, forcing himself to remain calm. If the law won't protect my daughter, I will. Reeves recognized the steely resolve in James's voice. He'd heard rumors about what Navy SEALs were capable of, and the last thing he wanted was a shootout in Silver Oak Springs. Just be careful, Reeves said quietly. We are on your side. Without another word, James left the station. He climbed back into his sedan, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The law's hands were tied, but his were not. The Dark Phantoms had made a grave error in thinking this was just another family they could bully. They had no idea who they provoked. Still, he knew charging into the old mill with guns blazing wasn't wise. He needed intel. He needed to know the layout, how many men they had, who was in charge, what kind of firepower they possessed. Years of strategic training came to bear. Know your enemy. He drove past Main Street, skirting the edge of town toward the dusty road that led to the abandoned mill. A rotting sign read, Cedarwood Mill closed. Beyond it was a chain-link fence and a wide clearing where rusted lumber equipment lay decaying. His heart hammered, and adrenaline flickered as he spotted a row of motorcycles near the crumbling structure. His instincts told him to keep moving. Any sign of loitering might draw suspicion. He drove on, mind spinning with potential recon strategies. Perhaps an approach under cover of darkness, a vantage point from the wooded areas behind the mill. This was a mission, albeit one on his home turf. He had a single objective: ensure the safety of his family. The means? That was a moral line he'd have to navigate. Yet one look into Lily's tearful eyes would banish any doubt. As he drove away, he whispered under his breath, a vow as sharp as broken glass. You messed with the wrong little girl. That night, once Lily was sound asleep and Sarah had turned in for an uneasy rest, James slipped quietly out of the house. He was dressed in dark, non-reflective clothing. He'd done a quick inventory of his old gear, a pair of night vision goggles, a tactical knife, and a sidearm he kept locked away for emergencies. While he had no intention of initiating a firefight, he also couldn't risk going unarmed against a known criminal gang. He left the sedan behind, opting instead for a borrowed dirt bike from a nearby neighbor who owed James a favor. The neighbor hadn't asked many questions, just pressed the keys into James's hand with a whispered, "Be safe," and that was that. The moon was half hidden behind drifting clouds, providing enough light to navigate but not so much as to expose him. He took a back trail that meandered around the outskirts of town, winding through a dense patch of pine forest. The path was bumpy, forcing him to navigate carefully, but he knew it would deposit him near the old mill, close enough to observe without being seen. The wind whipped past him, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. As he neared his destination, he cut the engine, guiding the bike behind thick underbrush. He did a quick scan of the surroundings. No immediate sign of patrols, though he knew better than to assume the Dark Phantoms hadn't set up watchers. He crept through the undergrowth, moving silently, his SEAL training second nature. Reaching a vantage point overlooking the mill's courtyard, he took a moment to study the layout. The main building was a hulking two-story structure with broken windows, presumably the old lumber processing area. Next to it stood a smaller building, maybe an office, its windows boarded. He spotted a handful of bikes parked outside, though fewer than in the daytime. Perhaps some of the gang members were out riding. Light spilled through gaps in the large building's walls, flickering like it came from portable lamps or even a bonfire. He could make out faint voices, but not distinct words. He moved closer, hugging the shadows, until he found a vantage that allowed him to peer inside. What he saw was a snapshot of the Dark Phantom's nighttime routine. A handful of bikers laughing around a makeshift fire pit in the center of the open space. Cases of beer littered the floor, and the men looked rowdy, but not on high alert. Off to one side, a muscular figure with a shaved head and a swirling serpent tattoo on his neck tinkered with a rifle, occasionally glancing around. That must be one of their enforcers, James thought. On the opposite side, a tall, wiry man with ponytailed hair seemed to be giving instructions to a group of younger recruits. A smaller door at the back opened, and two more bikers emerged, dragging a large crate. They popped it open to reveal bundles of something James couldn't identify from this distance. He maneuvered slightly, adjusting his night vision goggles. The forms looked suspiciously like bricks of contraband, possibly drugs. The men counted them, grinning and exchanging jokes. That explained part of how the gang financed itself. James scanned further, searching for a leadership figure, the one who must have confronted Lily. A few had the distinctive mirrored sunglasses perched on their foreheads or pockets, but none matched the exact description Lily had given, at least from what James could see. He filed the faces away in his memory, carefully noting who seemed to be in charge of the operation tonight. Time slipped by. James watched as more men rolled in on their bikes, greeted with cheers. The group grew from half a dozen to almost 15, though the atmosphere was less like a fortress and more like a rowdy biker party. Still, there was a sense of routine, of men who believed themselves untouchable. Finally, the man with the shaved head barked something, and the group quieted momentarily. James strained to listen, picking up fragments of conversation. Talk of a job they had completed, references to intimidation in a neighboring county, bits about money collected from local businesses. He heard nothing about the lemonade stand incident, but it was clear the Dark Phantoms considered themselves unstoppable. A rustling behind James made him tense. He crouched lower, hand on his sidearm, scanning the darkness. For a moment, he thought it might be one of the gang scouts. But out of the corner of his eye, he glimpsed a flash of movement, a deer bounding through the brush. Relieved but still alert, James exhaled slowly, returning his attention to the gang's operations. He stayed until well past midnight, gathering as much intel as he could. A confrontation now would be unwise. They had the numbers, and he had no backup. James prided himself on being strategic. Rushing in to make an example of them might feel satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't protect Lily or Sarah long-term. No, he needed a plan that would dismantle their power, or at least cripple it enough that the local authorities could finish the job. Eventually, the men seemed to settle in for a night of drinking. Some drifted off to what looked like an upper-level loft area. Others kept an eye on the perimeter, though lazily. James decided he'd learned all he could for one night. He slunk back through the woods, found the dirt bike, and retraced his route. By the time he slipped into the house, dawn was just beginning to color the sky a pale gray. He locked the door quietly, removing his boots by the entrance. As he made his way upstairs, he passed Lily's room. She was asleep, her small form curled around that stuffed dolphin. James paused, heart clenching with a surge of protective love. In his bedroom, Sarah stirred, blinking awake when she sensed him nearby. She sat up, worry etched on her face. "You went out, didn't you?" she whispered. James nodded, removing his jacket. "I had to get a look at what we're dealing with." Her voice was tight with concern. "And?" He sighed, sliding into bed beside her. "They're well organized, bigger operation than just roughing up civilians. Drugs, extortion, typical biker gang stuff. But they're not invincible." Sarah studied his face, noticing the exhaustion. "You have a plan?" "Working on it," James murmured. "Go back to sleep." "I'm here now." Though Sarah nodded, she didn't quite relax. She took his hand, and they lay in silence for a few moments. Eventually, her breathing evened out, lulled by exhaustion and the comfort of his presence. James stayed awake, mind sifting through possibilities until the first golden rays of sunrise signaled another day. The next few days unfolded in a tense dance between the walkers, the Dark Phantoms, and the townspeople. Lily went back to her routine of coloring and playing, but she no longer ventured outside alone. Sarah resumed her shifts at the florist, constantly looking over her shoulder. James spent his time discreetly surveying potential alliances within Silver Oak Springs, business owners, neighbors, anyone who might be ready to stand up against the gang's tyranny. He discovered a mixed response. Some trembled at the mention of the dark phantoms, preferring to keep their heads down. Others quietly offered support but balked at any direct confrontation, citing fear for their families. A small fraction, though, showed a spark of courage. Among them was a local mechanic named Hank Morrison, a Vietnam veteran who walked with a limp and didn't shy away from calling the bikers rotten punks. One afternoon, James visited Hank's garage on the edge of town. The air smelled of motor oil and grease, the clang of tools echoing off corrugated metal walls. Hank, a gruff man in his 60s with a bushy gray mustache, eyed James with a respectful nod. "Heard what they did to your little girl," he said, barely containing his anger. "Low blow, even for them." James nodded, appreciating the solidarity. "Yeah, I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again." Hank set aside his wrench, leaning heavily on the hood of a classic Chevy he was repairing. "You're a SEAL, right?" "That's right." Hank grunted with approval. "I was Special Forces. Different war, different time. But I don't like bullies, never have. I've been waiting for someone to do something about those jackals. I'll help if I can." James felt a rare sense of kinship. He lowered his voice. "They have about 15 to 20 guys at the mill, lots of guns, probably some top cover from crooked cops. It's going to take more than just me to neutralize them in one go." Hank nodded slowly. "A direct assault suicidal, without bigger guns and more men. But you could chip away at them. Hit them where it hurts, their money, their image of control." James rubbed his chin, thinking, "I've considered that. Target their drug routes, intercept deals, gather evidence to hand over to the feds if possible." Hank let out a raspy chuckle. "That'd rattle 'em good. They start losing product, losing money, they'll get desperate. Desperate men make mistakes." He pulled out a scrap of paper, scribbling a phone number. "I know a few guys from my old units scattered around the county. They're older, but they still know how to handle themselves in a fight. You need an extra set of hands, Cole." James took the paper. "Thanks, Hank. This means a lot. Just make sure you get those punks off our streets," Hank said, returning to his work. "I can't bear to see a kid's lemonade stand destroyed by grown men. It's evil." Leaving the garage, James felt a spark of hope. Maybe the entire town wouldn't cower once they saw a viable chance to push back. Back at home, Lily was in the living room, her crayons spread across the coffee table. She wasn't drawing happy flowers or horses. She was drawing a picture of a little girl behind a lemonade stand that was all patched up. Next to the girl was a tall figure in uniform, labeled Daddy. Underneath, she wrote, "No more bullies," in big letters. James swallowed the lump in his throat when he saw it. He gently ruffled Lily's hair. "That's really good, sweet pea." She looked up, offering him a tiny smile. "I'm going to rebuild my stand one day. But not until it's safe." The determination in her eyes both inspired and pained him. "It will be safe," he said, quietly vowing to make it true. A short while later, Sarah brought out a tray with sandwiches and lemonade. Ironic, given recent events, but comforting nonetheless. "Any news?" she asked. James told her about his conversation with Hank, potential for outside help if needed. Sarah listened intently. "I just want us to be able to go outside without looking over our shoulders," she admitted. "Is that too much to ask?" He squeezed her hand. "I'm working on it. Just be patient. And let me know if you see anything suspicious." Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's the florist shop. I'll take this in the other room." James nodded, turning his attention back to Lily. She had resumed coloring, humming softly under her breath. For a moment, the household seemed almost normal, but the tension coiled below the surface, a silent reminder that they were in the eye of the storm. Just then, the rumble of motorcycle engines filtered through the open window. James tensed, moving to peer outside without drawing attention. Two bikers rode past slowly. One gave the house a lingering look, pointing toward the yard before speeding up. James's heart thudded. They were being watched. He closed the window and turned back to Lily, forcing a reassuring smile. "Why don't we go upstairs, sweetie? I'll help you with that puzzle you like." Lily looked puzzled by his abrupt suggestion, but she nodded. "Okay, Daddy." Upstairs, Sarah was just finishing her phone call. James gently closed the bedroom door. "Two of them just drove by," he said, voice low. "They're keeping tabs on us." Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, anxiety flaring in her eyes. "They're not going to leave us alone, are they?" "Not until they're stopped," James replied, voice grim. "I need to move faster." That night, James spread a map of Silver Oak Springs across the kitchen table. He circled the main roads, the old mill, possible vantage points, and local businesses rumored to pay protection money. Sarah watched, arms folded, her expression conflicted between fear and unwavering support. He tapped on the roads leading out of town. They must be running contraband through here, especially Route 74. If we can intercept a shipment, or at least gather proof that ties them to a major crime, the state or federal agencies might come down on them. Sarah nodded slowly. "We have to be sure it's safe, James. You can't just..." She was cut off by a banging on the front door. Lily, who was in the living room reading, gasped audibly. James put a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. Another heavy knock rattled the frame. Sarah whispered, "Should we call the police?" James shook his head, gesturing for Sarah to stay with Lily. He moved to the door, glancing through the peephole. Standing on a porch was a large man in a leather jacket, the Dark Phantom's insignia blatantly on display. His shaved head glinted under the porch light. James recognized him from his recon. The man said nothing, just stared at the door as if challenging whoever was inside to answer. Taking a calming breath, James opened the door partially. "Something I can help you with?" he asked, voice steady. The biker leaned against the porch support beam, eyes assessing James from head to toe. "Heard you're the tough guy father of that little lemonade girl." "The name's Boone." He smiled, revealing crooked teeth. "I just came by to give a friendly warning." James arched an eyebrow, refusing to show intimidation. "Warning about what?" Boone chuckled darkly. "Your little girl was told to pay a fee if she wants to run a business here. We see you've been sniffing around, talking to people. It'd be best if you mind your own business, Dad. You don't want to get on the wrong side of the Phantoms." James tightened his grip on the door. "Any business my daughter runs on my own property is my business," he said quietly. "I suggest you stay away from my home." Boone's gaze flickered. For a moment, the bravado wavered, replaced by something like surprise. Perhaps he wasn't used to being spoken to with such calm defiance. Then his lip curled. "Listen, hero, you might think you're tough because of that uniform you used to wear, but we run this town. If you keep poking your nose where it doesn't belong, we'll come back, and it won't just be a polite knock on your door next time." James felt a surge of rage, but he tamped it down. "This conversation is over," he said coolly, pushing the door closed. Boone responded by rapping the door again, harder. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet neighborhood. Then James heard the crunch of boots on the gravel walkway, the rev of a motorcycle, and Boone was gone. When James turned around, Sarah stood behind him, pale and shaking. Lily was peeking from behind her mother's leg. The girl's eyes were wide with terror. James knelt, pulling Lily gently into his arms. "It's okay," he murmured, though his own nerves were on fire. "He's gone now." Lily's voice quivered. "I'm scared, Daddy. Are they going to hurt us?" James pressed his lips together, smoothing a hand over her hair. "No," he said firmly, "they're not. I promise." But in his mind, the confrontation replayed on a loop. The Dark Phantoms were throwing down the gauntlet, confident they could intimidate him just like everyone else. They had no idea what a Navy SEAL would endure to protect his daughter. He looked at Sarah, whose eyes brimmed with questions. He nodded once, a silent exchange that said, "We stand together." The next move, however, was his. It had to be decisive. At dawn the next morning, James decided it was time to take Hank up on his offer. He dropped Lily off at school with an encouraging hug, a routine they were trying to maintain despite the tension. Then he drove out to Hank's garage. Sarah agreed to stay at the florist's shop, only a phone call away. Hank was waiting, leaning against a dusty pickup truck. When he saw James pull up, he waved him over. "Heard one of those goons paid you a visit," Hank said, his tone grave. James nodded. "They're getting bolder. I need to strike before they do." Hank opened the passenger door of the truck. Inside were a few crates. He pried one open to reveal an assortment of weapons, pistols, shotguns, and a few older rifles. "I keep these locked away. Part of my old surplus. You got your own gear, I'm sure, but take what you need." James's eyebrows lifted. "That's quite an arsenal." Hank shrugged. "Better safe than sorry. Of course, I'd prefer we avoid a bloodbath." "Same," James agreed, leaning in to inspect a rifle. "We need intelligence first. We can't just roll in without a plan." Hank crossed his arms. "I have a couple of buddies who can help with recon. They're older, but they were once top tier. If we catch wind of a drug run or an arms deal, we could intercept." James rubbed his chin, thinking back to his nighttime recon at the mill. "I saw them unloading crates that looked like contraband. If we could find out when and where they move that stuff, we could get evidence or disrupt the supply." Hank nodded, picking up a small notebook. "I know a guy who sometimes works as a trucker for them. Not a gang member, just a driver they hire. He might talk for the right price or the right persuasion." James allowed a small grimace. "Let's try to keep persuasion nonviolent." Hank chuckled. "You're a Navy SEAL, right? That's your specialty, quiet persuasion." They agreed to meet back in 2 days, giving Hank time to track down his driver contact and James time to finalize the details of the operation. Meanwhile, James would prepare gear and see if the local deputies might be quietly looped in. If they caught the phantoms in the act of smuggling, the cops would be forced to take action, or at least have enough evidence for outside agencies to step in. That evening, James had a quiet dinner with Sarah and Lily. The little girl picked at her plate. Concern etched on her face. Finally, she spoke up. "Daddy, can I go back to selling lemonade someday?" James felt a stab of protectiveness. "Of course you can," he said gently. "You just might have to wait until it's safer." "But soon." She nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She'd seen how fear could shatter innocence. After the meal, Lily went to her room to read, leaving James and Sarah alone in the kitchen. Sarah turned on the faucet, letting warm water fill the sink for the dishes, while James dried. Her hands trembled slightly. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate feeling powerless." James paused, looking at her with deep empathy. "You're not powerless. You kept Lily safe when I wasn't here." Sarah gave a shaky smile. "That's different. Just protecting her from them once doesn't mean they won't come back. I feel like any day, any moment, we could get threatened again." He set down a clean plate, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I'm going to end it. They won't threaten you or Lily anymore." She studied his face. "I trust you," she said, placing a damp palm over his. "Just don't get hurt." James covered her hand with his other. "I promise," he said, but the heaviness in his voice hinted at the danger he knew was coming. The next 2 days were a blur of planning and subtle movements. James met Hank's old military buddies, 2 men named Roy and Vince, both in their late 50s yet still carrying themselves with a military bearing. They agreed to help gather intel on the gang's routes. Deputy Reeves, approached carefully, indicated that he might be able to rally a small response team if they could provide concrete evidence of a large-scale crime. Finally, Hank's trucker contact came through, letting them know that the Phantoms planned to move a significant shipment of narcotics along Route 74 at midnight in 2 days' time. It would be transported in a plain box truck, escorted by a couple of bikers for security. The driver had also let slip the meeting point, an abandoned way station on the edge of the county. James's plan was simple but risky. He and Hank's small team would lie in wait near the way station, document the transfer with cameras, and alert the deputies the moment illegal goods were visible. If they could gather indisputable evidence, the local authorities would have probable cause to arrest those involved. The hope was to quietly apprehend the bikers without starting a gunfight. But contingency plans were made. If the bikers resisted, James and his makeshift crew would step in. James prayed it wouldn't come to that. He had no illusions about how quickly violence could erupt. The night of the ambush arrived. James kissed Sarah and Lily goodbye, promising to call once it was over. Lily clung to him. "Be careful, Daddy," she whispered. He knelt and looked her in the eyes. "You're the reason I'm doing this," he said softly. "I'll be back." With that, he left, driving out to the meet point. The way station was a forlorn structure by a deserted stretch of highway, its neon sign long since burned out. Hank, Roy, and Vince were there, parked out of sight. Deputy Reeves was positioned a half-mile away with 2 other squad cars, ready to swoop in once the contraband was confirmed. James and the others set up behind a line of shrubbery that overlooked the way station parking lot. They had night vision cameras at the ready, each man armed but doing his best to remain undetected. The crickets chirped a low chorus beneath the pale moonlight. Midnight approached. Nothing. The tension in James's gut tightened. Had the intel been wrong? A few more minutes crawled by. Then, at 12:14 a.m., they spotted headlights. A nondescript box truck rumbled into the lot, tailed by 2 motorcycles. One rider had a ponytail streaming behind him. James recognized him from the mill recon. They waited, hearts pounding, as a second set of headlights appeared. A black SUV pulled up, tinted windows concealing the occupants. 2 men stepped out, both wearing suits, an unusual sight for a biker transaction. Possibly higher-level distributors or buyers. They approached the box truck, exchanging quick words. Hank steadied the camera, zooming in to capture the moment one of the bikers opened the back of the truck. Stacked crates could be seen. The suited men lifted the lid on one crate, removing a brick of white powder. Even at a distance, it was clear this was contraband. Hank continued filming, adjusting the lens for clarity. James spoke into a small radio, voice barely above a whisper. "Confirm contraband. Move in on my signal." Deputy Reeves responded quietly. "Confirmed." They watched as the men conducted their business, talking in hushed, hurried tones. Soon, the crates were transferred into the SUV. With the deal seemingly complete, James realized they had a narrow window to catch the bikers with the drugs. Once the SUV left, the evidence would be gone. Now he hissed into the radio. A moment later, the wail of a police siren pierced the still night air. 2 patrol cars roared into the parking lot, lights flashing. The bikers spun in alarm, going for their weapons. The men in suits shouted curses, scrambling for the SUV. James and his team emerged from the darkness, firearms raised but muzzle discipline intact. "Hands where we can see them," James barked, stepping into the open. The raw authority in his voice made one of the bikers hesitate. Then everything happened at once. One biker fired a shot at the deputies, forcing them to take cover behind their cruiser. The SUV screeched in reverse, nearly running over one of the suit-clad men who dove aside. Hank and Roy ducked behind a concrete pillar, returning a few warning shots to keep the bikers pinned. James's adrenaline surged. He saw the ponytailed biker rev his engine, about to make a break for it. James sprinted forward, taking advantage of the confusion. Another shot rang out, hitting the ground near his feet. He dived behind a rusted metal barrier, heart pounding. This was no longer just an arrest. It was a firefight. The SUV managed to maneuver around the police cars, speeding off into the darkness. Reeves cursed into his radio. They're getting away with half the shipment. James gritted his teeth. The immediate threat was still the armed bikers. Focus, he told himself. He gestured to Hank, who nodded. They provided suppressing fire while Roy and Vince flanked the position. The flanking maneuver took the bikers by surprise. Within seconds, Roy had tackled one biker to the ground, disarming him. The second biker, pinned by James's covering shots, raised his hands in shaky surrender. Deputy Reeves and his partner rushed in to secure them. Handcuffs clicked. The man with the ponytail spat on the ground, glaring at James. "You messed with the wrong crew, man." James stared him down, voice icy. "You threatened my little girl. You're the ones who messed up." The night air crackled with tension as one of the cuffed bikers sneered. "You think this ends here? Our boss is gonna bury you." James felt the rush of victory mingled with dread. They'd succeeded in capturing some of the gang's members and part of the contraband, but the SUV, and presumably the bigger fish, had escaped. It was a partial win, a blow to the dark phantoms, but not a knockout punch. Deputy Reeves surveyed the scene, breathing heavily. "We'll book these two. The drugs we recovered are enough evidence to press serious charges. We'll put out an APB on the SUV. Good work, Walker." James nodded. Though the reality of what this meant settled in, the rest of the phantoms would retaliate. He pictured Lily sleeping soundly at home, oblivious to the gunshots echoing in the night. And he knew the war had only just begun. Morning light found James seated at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. Calls from Deputy Reeves and Hank had filled the early hours, each detailing the fallout of the ambush. The two captured bikers were in custody, but only one was willing to talk, albeit grudgingly, about the gang's activities. The other glared defiantly, refusing to cooperate. Sarah quietly placed a mug of coffee before him. She searched his face for clues. "You did what you had to do," she said softly. James nodded, eyes haunted by the memory of muzzle flashes in the dark. "We rattled them, but the rest of that shipment escaped." If the phantoms regroup, Sarah's voice wavered. "I'm worried about Lily. What if they come for her at school?" James clenched his fists. "I won't let that happen. I'll talk to the principal, maybe arrange for discreet security. We'll coordinate with the deputies." Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but was interrupted by a knock at the door, this one urgent but not hostile. James moved to answer, cracking it open just enough. He found Deputy Marnie Ortega standing on the porch, anxiety etched on her face. "Mr. Walker, may I come in?" He nodded, stepping aside. Ortega entered and immediately spotted Sarah and Lily in the living room. Lily was trying to keep busy playing with her dolls, but the tension was palpable. The deputy cleared her throat. "We have a situation. Last night's operation was a partial success, but the rest of the phantoms are furious. We got word they're calling in reinforcements from outside counties." Sarah looked alarmed. "More of them?" Ortega nodded, her posture taut. "That's the rumor. They consider the arrest of their men an act of war. We're worried they might escalate." James let out a slow breath, rubbing his temples. "We expected this." Ortega lowered her voice. "I suggest you keep a low profile, maybe even consider leaving town for a while. At least until this blows over." A flicker of defiance sparked in James's eyes. "I'm not running. This is our home." Sarah squeezed his arm horn. She wanted to keep Lily safe, and running was tempting. Yet she also saw the resolve in James's face. "We'll do whatever's best for Lily," she said quietly. Lily, her attention drawn, walked over, clutching her doll. "We're not leaving, are we?" she asked, voice trembling. She looked back and forth between her parents, her eyes reflecting worry and a hint of sorrow. James knelt to face her. "I'll keep you safe, sweetheart. I promise." Ortega sighed. "I had to offer. Look, if you decide to stay, please take extra precautions." We'll increase patrols on your street." James stood, nodding his thanks. "We appreciate it. But I'll protect my family by any means necessary." Ortega hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You're a brave girl. Keep being strong for your mom and dad." She glanced at James, adding softly, "I'll update you if we learn anything else." After she left, Sarah blew out a shaky breath. "This is getting out of hand, James." James led her into the kitchen, gesturing for Lily to stay in the living room. He grabbed a pen and paper. "We have to assume they'll retaliate soon. They'll target me or Hank or anyone they think was involved in that ambush." Sarah's hands trembled around her coffee mug. "What do we do?" James laid out a plan. 1. Ensure Lily was never alone. Either one of them would be with her or a trusted friend. 2. Coordinate with Hank and Roy to create a neighborhood watch system, discreet but alert. 3. Keep in close contact with Ortega and Reeves for any intel. 4. Prepare the house for a worst-case scenario. Reinforce locks, consider installing a simple alarm. Keep a firearm accessible, but out of Lily's reach. Sarah's voice wobbled. "You make it sound like we're preparing for a siege." "Because we might be," James admitted. "These guys think fear is power. We have to show them they picked the wrong family." She nodded, tears brimming but unshed. "I trust you, James. Just do what you have to do." That evening, Hank, Roy, and Vince came by under the guise of a casual barbecue. Smoke from the grill wafted into the air, mingling with the tense conversation and hushed voices. Lily was inside, watching TV with the volume turned up so she wouldn't overhear. "We had eyes on the mill earlier," Hank said quietly. "A lot of bikes rolling in, some from out of town. Looks like they're gearing up." James rubbed the back of his neck. "We can't take them head-on in a firefight. That's a recipe for disaster." Roy, who had the stoic demeanor of a man who'd seen too many battles, offered a grunt of agreement. "We need them to break themselves against the law. Keep gathering evidence, trafficking, weapons violations, anything. The more we feed the feds, the bigger the crackdown." Vince eyed James. "But we also gotta survive until that happens. They might come after us individually. If they find out who was behind the ambush, they'll strike." Hank nodded. "We keep watch. We're all packing, and we stay in communication. If they try something, we respond fast, but let's not escalate unless we have to." James looked at the horizon, the sun sinking in a blaze of orange and red, as though foreshadowing conflict. "We stand our ground." They all murmured agreements, forging an unspoken pact. The camaraderie felt solid, but James still worried about innocent bystanders, his wife, his child, the neighbors. The last thing he wanted was a shootout in their peaceful little street. Late that night, James sat alone on the porch, armed, scanning the quiet road. A single street lamp flickered at the corner. The hush of the neighborhood felt fragile, as though the slightest disturbance might shatter it. The memory of Lily's lemonade stand flashed in his mind, how pure her intentions were, how easily it was destroyed. He clenched his jaw. This ends, one way or another. The faint roar of motorcycle engines reached his ears. He tensed, turning off the porch light to remain in darkness. 2 headlights appeared at the far end of the street, approaching slowly. James ducked behind a porch column, heart pounding. At the last moment, the bike sped up, continuing past the house. He caught a glimpse of their leather vests, dark phantoms. They were making their presence known, reminding him that they were out there. A predator's intimidation tactic, but also a sign they didn't yet feel safe attacking outright. James stayed outside until dawn kissed the sky. Only then did he re-enter the house, a bleak sense of foreboding settling in his gut. The fuse was lit. It was only a matter of time before it burned to an explosion. In the midst of danger, life in Silver Oak Springs limped along. Children still went to school, shopkeepers still opened their doors, and the local diners still served coffee and pie to weary townsfolk. Lily resumed her routine of coloring and playing, though she rarely ventured beyond the front yard. One weekend afternoon, Lily approached her mother with a determined glint in her eyes. "Mommy, can I rebuild my lemonade stand? Just for a little while." Sarah's first instinct was to say no, but she saw something unwavering in Lily's expression, a spark of defiance against fear. Sensing a teachable moment, she hesitated. "Let me talk to Daddy about it, okay?" They found James in the garage, tinkering with a set of locks he planned to install on the windows. When Lily posed the question, he looked troubled. "Sweetheart, it's not safe yet." Lily crossed her arms, and for a moment, James saw a reflection of his own stubbornness. "But we can't let them win, right? I'm raising money for sick kids. That's important." He met Sarah's eyes, her expression mirroring the conflict in his own heart. They didn't want to encourage Lily to hide forever. Fear was precisely the weapon the gang used to control people. If Lily wanted to stand up, who were they to deny her that courage? James exhaled. "All right, how about this? We'll rebuild the stand, but in the front yard, with me or Mom always nearby. If you see anything suspicious, you come inside immediately." Lily's face lit up like sunrise. "Deal." The next morning, father and daughter set about reconstructing the lemonade stand. They used sturdier wood, painted fresh signs, and attached a small banner that read, "Hope for Kids." Lily insisted on writing, "We will not be bullied," on a corner of the sign in bright yellow paint, a quiet statement of defiance. Neighbors watched with curiosity. Some admired the bravery, others shook their heads, muttering that the family was asking for trouble. But Lily was undeterred. By noon, she was set up, plastic cups neatly arranged, her donation jar at the ready, and a brand new photograph of her father in uniform next to it. James sat on a porch, arms folded, scanning the street. Under normal circumstances, a father's protective watch might seem comical for a simple lemonade stand. But they both knew the stakes. The air was heavy with tension as each passing vehicle momentarily raised James's alertness. "Hey, Lily, can I buy a cup?" a voice called. It was Mrs. Neville, a sweet elderly neighbor. Lily beamed, and James felt a pang of gratitude. Perhaps not everyone was cowering in fear. "Sure. That'll be 50 cents, Lily said brightly, "or more if you want to help the hospital." Mrs. Neville handed over a crumpled dollar bill and patted Lily's head. "Bless your heart, dear. Stay safe." A few other neighbors trickled in, offering coins and words of encouragement. Although the day remained uneventful, James never once relaxed at vigilance. By late afternoon, Lily was tired but happy. She counted her donations inside, proud of having raised another small sum for the children's hospital. Sarah watched them from the kitchen, heart swelling with both love and fear. She appreciated James's presence, the steady reassurance that no matter what, he'd be there for Lily. As evening rolled in, they packed up the lemonade stand without incident, a small victory. Yet in the back of James's mind, a question loomed. Where were the dark phantoms, and when would they make their next move? The answer came the following day in a surprising phone call. Deputy Reeves reached out, asking James to come down to the station. When James arrived, he found Reeves in a small office with a man in a county detective's suit. The detective's name was Alan Rivers, an older gentleman who spoke with a measured tone. "Mr. Walker, thanks for coming," Rivers said, extending a hand. "We've been monitoring the dark phantoms for a while now. Your recent actions gave us something new to work with." James quirked an eyebrow. "The ambush on Route 74? Rivers nodded. "Word travels. You rattled them. They're calling in more members, but that also means they're making mistakes, leaving a trail. We have enough now to involve state-level organized crime units. But we need your help." James glanced at Reeves. The deputy looked more confident than he had in weeks. "We have a plan," Reeves said, "but it's risky. We want to orchestrate a sting operation at the mill. The state police can provide backup, but we need someone on the inside, or close enough to get eyes on the situation. Hank's friends from your ambush team have already agreed to help coordinate from outside." James crossed his arms, a sense of weariness creeping over him. You want me to go in? Rivers shook his head. Not alone. But we believe the Dark Phantoms are planning to stockpile weapons for an escalation. If we can catch them storing illegal firearms at the mill, plus the leftover drugs, we can bust them all at once. No more slaps on the wrist. James's thoughts spun. A large-scale raid could indeed end the threat, if executed perfectly. If it went sideways, however, the town could become a war zone. He rubbed his chin. I'll do whatever it takes to keep my family safe. Rivers leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. We'll do this by the book. We have the resources now, but we need real-time intel. Are you willing to provide that? James swallowed, considering Lily, Sarah, Hank, and the entire town. Yes, he finally said, his voice grave. Tell me what you need. Preparations for the raid moved quickly. The plan was to stage it the following evening, based on credible intel that a truckload of illegal weapons would arrive at the mill. Rivers arranged a covert group of state troopers to converge nearby, hidden until James and Hank's crew confirmed the delivery. Then they'd hit the mill, hopefully rounding up the entire leadership of the Dark Phantoms. That night, tension soared to new heights at the Walker house. James meticulously checked his gear, a bulletproof vest, tactical communications earpiece, and a personal firearm. Sarah hovered, worry etched on her features. You're sure about this? She asked, voice trembling. James placed his hands on her shoulders. It's our best shot at ending this for good. Once they're gone, Lily can live without fear. Sarah blinked back tears. I hate that you have to risk your life for this. He pulled her into a tender hug, pressing his forehead to hers. I'd do anything to protect you both. Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching a small plush seal. She sensed the gravity of the moment without fully understanding it. Daddy, you're leaving again, aren't you? James bent down to her level. For just a little while, he assured, his voice gentle yet firm. You be good for Mommy. Keep that lemonade stand safe for me, okay? Lily nodded, though tears shimmered in her eyes. Come back, Daddy. He kissed her forehead. Always. Leaving the house felt like stepping off a cliff. James drove to the designated meeting spot, a clearing in the woods half a mile from the mill. Hank, Roy, Vince, and a contingent of uniformed state troopers were already there, quietly finalizing the operation. Detective Rivers stood near a cluster of unmarked police SUVs, scanning a map by flashlight. You ready? Rivers asked James softly. James inhaled sharply. Let's do this. Night fell with an oppressive weight. Clouds slid across the moon, casting the old mill in shifting shadows. The bikes were lined up in larger numbers than usual, at least 20, James guessed. The entire place buzzed with tension. From their vantage in the woods, James and Hank's team watched as a blacked-out truck rumbled onto the property. Bikers swarmed, guiding the vehicle into a loading area. Detective Rivers and the state troopers waited further down the road, out of sight. Record everything, James whispered, tapping the night vision camera. Once we confirm those are weapons, we give the signal. Hank zoomed in on the truck, capturing the moment a burly biker pried open a crate to reveal rifles. The man held one up, brandishing it at the cheering group. James's heart pounded. This is it. He pressed the transmit button on his radio, sending a coded message. They have guns in the open. Move in. Far off, the low rumble of engines heralded the approach of the troopers. James and the others prepared to move forward, forming a flank to cut off any escape into the woods. Within moments, the quiet night exploded into chaos. Red and blue lights flashed, sirens blaring. State troopers in tactical gear poured onto the scene. Bikers shouted warnings, scrambling for cover. Gunfire erupted, short bursts and muzzle flashes slicing the darkness. James and Hank advanced carefully, taking positions behind a rusted bulldozer. Two bikers fired wildly in their direction. Bullets ricocheted off metal, sending sparks. James returned controlled shots, forcing the bikers to duck behind a stack of crates. Detective Rivers shouted commands through a megaphone. Drop your weapons. You're surrounded. But the defiance of the dark phantoms was palpable. Some attempted to mount their bikes to flee, only to be cut off by the ring of troopers. In the thick of it, James spotted a familiar face, Boone, the shaved-head biker who had visited his porch. Boone was barking orders, trying to organize a defense. He caught sight of James and bellowed in rage, firing a shot that whistled past James's ear. James dove behind cover, adrenaline surging. He popped up to return fire, aiming for Boone's legs. Boone staggered as a bullet grazed his thigh, cursing loudly. But he continued fighting, fueled by anger. Elsewhere, Hank and Roy exchanged shots with another cluster of bikers. Vince flanked them, carefully taking out the tires of bikes to prevent escape. The troopers pressed forward, shields up, rifles raised. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the side of the mill. Someone had detonated a small charge, possibly to destroy evidence or create a diversion. Flames licked at the rotting timbers, smoke billowing into the night sky. The commotion caused a momentary lull in gunfire. James seized the chance to edge around a building, scanning for the new threat. Through the haze, he saw the silhouette of a man with mirrored sunglasses, the same man Lily had described, holding a remote detonator. The last piece of the puzzle, the ringleader, presumably. James sprinted, weaving between debris, ignoring the sting of smoke in his lungs. The man spotted him and fled into the mill's interior, where the flames hadn't yet reached. Determined, James pursued, radioing to Hank, going inside after the ringleader. Watch for my signal. Inside, the mill was a dusty labyrinth. Broken machinery and scatter crates formed a maze of hazards. The flicker of flames from outside cast an eerie glow on the walls. James stayed low, senses on high alert. He could hear the man's footsteps echo, then fade. Creeping forward, James felt a sudden rush of movement. The ringleader ambushed him from behind a stack of pallets, swinging a metal pipe. James reacted on instinct, ducking under the blow. The pipe glanced off his shoulder, sending pain shooting down his arm. Gritting his teeth, James pivoted, delivering a swift elbow strike. The man stumbled, dropping the pipe, but he was quick. He lunged at James with a switchblade. The blade sliced James's vest, narrowly missing skin. James grabbed the man's wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the floor. They grappled, exchanging blows in the dim light. The ringleader was strong, but James's SEAL training gave him the edge in close combat. He delivered a sharp knee to the solar plexus, sending the man gasping for air. In the scuffle, the remote detonator slipped from the ringleader's pocket. James kicked it away, suspecting there might be more explosives. With a final surge, James pinned the man's arm behind his back and forced him face first against a large rusted machine. Game over, James growled, securing the ringleader's arms. The man coughed, spitting out blood, eyes wild with hatred. You have no idea who you're messing with, he hissed. James pressed him harder against the machine. I'm messing with the punks who destroyed my daughter's lemonade stand. That's enough for me. Outside, sirens continued to wail. James heard more boots storming the mill, troopers clearing each section. He signaled them with a whistle, stepping back just enough for a pair of officers to rush in, weapons at the ready. They cuffed the ringleader, who spat vile threats even as he was led away. Stepping outside, James coughed in the smoky air. Through the swirling haze, he saw the entire property swarming with law enforcement. Several bikers lay prone on the ground, cuffed. Others were being led to patrol cars. A handful of wounded were tended by paramedics, both troopers and gang members. The fire from the explosion was mostly contained, thanks to a quick response from the local fire department. Hank limped over, a graze on his arm but otherwise intact. We did it, he said, his voice trembling with adrenaline. James nodded, scanning for any remaining threat. Yeah, let's hope we got them all. Detective Rivers approached, removing his helmet. Nice work, Walker. We've got the ringleaders, the weapons, the contraband. We'll have plenty of evidence to put them away. James exhaled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. What about the ones who escaped? Rivers shook his head. We'll track them down. The main operation is dismantled. You can go home to your family. In the days that followed, Silver Oak Springs was abuzz with the news of the massive raid. The local paper ran front-page headlines about the Dark Phantom's takedown. While a few of the lower-level members remained at large, the leadership was in custody, their weapons seized, their criminal enterprise exposed. Neighbors ventured onto their porches with renewed confidence, exchanging relieved smiles. The sense of a cloud lifting was almost tangible. One afternoon, Lily tugged James's hand excitedly. "Daddy, can I sell lemonade again? Properly, I mean. For the kids at the hospital." James looked at her bright face, then glanced at Sarah, who nodded with a small, hopeful smile. "Go for it, sweet pea." And so Lily's lemonade stand reopened, this time with a bolder sign, "No bullies allowed." People came by in droves, drawn by curiosity and a desire to support the brave little girl. Word spread about how Lily's father, a Navy SEAL, had stood up to the gang that once terrorized their town. Donations poured in for the hospital, surpassing any amount Lily had ever raised before. Hank, Roy, and Vince joined one day, parking themselves near the stand, content to sip cold lemonade and watch Lily greet each customer with a sunny grin. James sat nearby, arms folded, a faint smile on his lips. He couldn't stop scanning the street for potential threats, but it seemed calm for once. Deputy Reeves and Marnie Ortega swung by, offering official kudos. Ortega bought a cup of lemonade with a $5 bill, telling Lily to keep the change. "Thanks for being brave," Ortega said, tipping her hat. That evening, the local community center held a small ceremony to honor those who'd helped in the raid. James stood near the back, uncomfortable with recognition, but Lily insisted on attending. The mayor gave a short speech, praising the law enforcement officers, James, Hank, and everyone involved. Applause echoed in the small auditorium. Lily tugged on James's sleeve. "Daddy, they're calling your name." He cleared his throat awkwardly and stepped forward, greeted by a handshake from the mayor and a wave of applause from the townspeople. The microphone squeaked as he approached. He glanced at Lily, who smiled encouragingly, hugging her stuffed dolphin. James spoke quietly, but his voice carried. "I'm not big on speeches. I just want to say thank you to everyone who stood up. I did what I had to do for my family, for my little girl. But I couldn't have done it alone." He looked at Hank, Roy, Vince, and the deputies. "When good people come together against fear, we can protect what matters." A standing ovation followed, though James felt more relieved than proud. Relieved that Lily could finally play outside without trembling, that Sarah could go to work without glancing over her shoulder, that the people of Silver Oak Springs could reclaim their peace. 3 weeks later, on a crisp, sunny Saturday, Lily's lemonade stand was in full swing. A banner reading celebrating a safe community hung from a nearby tree. Dozens of residents stopped by to buy lemonade or simply to chat, no longer fearful of phantom threats lurking in the shadows. Sarah busied herself helping Lily count the donations. With every coin that clinked into the jar, Lily beamed, imagining the children at the hospital who would benefit. James, observing from a short distance, felt a deep contentment settle in his chest. Hank approached with a wide grin, handing James a glass of lemonade. "A toast," he said, raising the cup, "to your family's courage, and to a town that finally decided enough was enough." James clinked cups with him, eyes lingering on Lily, who waved happily at a friend from school. "Here, here," he agreed, taking a sip of the tart, sweet drink. A shrill ring cut through the moment, James's cell phone. He recognized the number as his commanding officer's. With a small nod to Hank, he stepped away to answer. The call was short, and when it ended, James stared at the phone, lips pressed together. Sarah noticed his expression. "What is it?" He exhaled. "They want me back on duty soon." Another training rotation. Her face fell slightly, but she mustered a supportive smile. Well, that's your job. And now that the town's safe, we can manage. Lily, overhearing, ran over. They're sending you away again, Daddy. James crouched, meeting her at eye level. Yes, but I'll come back. I promise. He glanced at Sarah, who nodded in reassurance. Lily hugged him fiercely. I'll keep selling lemonade until you come home, she said, her voice muffled in his shoulder. And when you get back, I'll have a whole jar of donations to show you. James kissed the top of her head. I can't wait to see it. 2 days later, James prepared to depart for his next assignment. This time, there was no fear gnawing at him about leaving his family unprotected. The dark phantoms had been dismantled. Any remnants were scattered or hiding. The local police, bolstered by state support, maintained a vigilant presence to prevent a resurgence. As he loaded his duffel bag into the trunk of his car, Lily came running out, clutching a small, folded piece of paper. Daddy, wait. I drew you something to take with you. Curious, James unfolded it. The drawing showed 2 figures, a little girl at a lemonade stand and a man in a navy uniform. Above them was a bright sun, and scrawled at the top in little girl handwriting were the words, "Come home soon, Daddy." He swallowed the lump in his throat, gently tucking the picture into the front pocket of his bag. Thank you, sweetheart. I'll keep it safe. Sarah joined them, wrapping an arm around Lily's shoulders. We'll be here waiting for you, she said softly. James gave them both a final embrace. Stay strong. I'll call as soon as I can. When he climbed into the car and pulled away, Lily waved until the vehicle turned the corner. Sarah felt a pang of loneliness, but also of fierce pride. Her husband had turned the tables on the dark phantoms, proving that sometimes one person's courage, fueled by love, could rally an entire community. Back on Main Street, life began to blossom with an energy Silver Oak Springs hadn't felt in years. Businesses that once shuttered early out of fear stayed open late. New families moved in, drawn by the story of a town that refused to be bullied. And at the heart of it all, a little girl in pigtails sold lemonade. Every cup poured was a testament that goodness could triumph over intimidation, that even the darkest threats could be vanquished when a father's love and a community's courage united to stand firm. Cliffhanger/next chapter teaser. Months later, a rumor surfaced. A few of the dark phantoms who escaped had regrouped in a neighboring county, plotting their revenge. Late one night, a solitary motorcycle roared into Silver Oak Springs, a lone rider scanning the quiet streets. Only time would tell if a new threat was on the horizon, and if James J.J. Walker would be called upon once again to defend the town that now wore its scars with pride and refused to bow to fear.